Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from The Federalist. This one is dated June 3rd. It says, European populism is rising against an oppressive political elite. And I want to say this is in regards to the Polish elections that just happened fairly recently where the conservative candidate won, so thank God for that, but we'll find out. I haven't actually read this. I just thought the headline was good, and yes, it looks like it actually is. There we go. So it says, Europe's political class has turned its back on people it was supposed to protect, and the people have taken notice. And I hope they do, because they kind of need to. So over the weekend, a conservative Polish historian named Karol Nawrocki, and I probably butchered the name, backed by the Law and Justice opposition and President Trump, narrowly won the Polish presidential election. For the European political establishment, Nawrocki's victory was a catastrophe, a harbinger of right-wing fascism moving over the continent. Yeah, that's right-wing fascism isn't a thing, but okay. It says, why? Because Nawrocki campaigned against the mass immigration policy of Brussels while promoting conservative Catholic values and Polish nationalism. Nothing wrong with that. As during his victory speech Sunday night, Nawrocki said, My Poland is a Poland without illegal migrants. It is a Poland where, instead of integration centers, there are deportation centers for those who want to destroy our safety. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that comment at all. It says, it turns out this sentiment is increasingly popular not just in Poland, but all across Europe. So last week in Portugal, the right-wing populist Chega party overtook the center-left Socialist Party as the country's main opposition. 6 years ago, Chega had only a single seat in the Assembly of the Republic. It now has 60. Good job there. So in Germany, and I'm going to butcher this, Alternative für Deutschland, or the AfD party, I know who they are, is one of the most popular political parties in the country, yet Germany's domestic intelligence agency has officially classified AfD as a right-wing extremist group. Why? Because AfD opposes mass immigration and promotes German national identity. In France's national elections last year, only a desperately cobbled-together coalition of left-wing parties prevented the right-wing National Rally, or RN, and its allies from winning. Yeah, I remember saw that, and that was kind of BS. It says, these populist movements are seen as a threat to the political class of Europe because they are concerned primarily with a proper historical understanding of what the nation is and what the state is for, which is the preservation of the nation and the defense of its people and its heritage. Europe's elites hate that because their political project is explicitly post-national. They want to destroy the nation as such and replace it with a supranational institutions governed by a global elite. Yes, they think they're better than you, is essentially it. So the Trump administration has noticed this. Indeed, one of the most important strategic foreign policy moves of the Trump administration has been the reorientation of America's relationship with Europe in light of these new realities. The White House has made an accurate assessment that Europe's political class no longer supports the Western tradition of natural law, individual rights, and national sovereignty. It's a recognition, quite frankly, that European leaders have taken an authoritarian turn against their own people, calling into question the special relationship the United States has had with Europe since the American founding. As Vice President J.D. Vance alluded to this back in February in his speech at the Munich Security Conference, calling out European governments for criminalizing free speech, jailing citizens for their opinions, and attempting to outlaw popular political parties. So I don't know why I got so tongue-twisted there. It says, you cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, Vance said, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Very well said by our vice president. The growing authoritarianism of European elites has since become a recurring theme in the Trump administration. A recent and much-discussed essay on the U.S. State Department Substack page by Samuel Samson placed this authoritarian drift into its proper historical context. After the devastation of World War II, European powers sought to prevent future conflict by creating so-called open societies that would transcend nationalism and tradition in favor of a global liberalism that would in theory knit the continent, and indeed the world, closer together. It says, today this promise lies in tatters, writes Samson. What endures instead is an aggressive campaign against Western civilization itself. Across Europe, governments have weaponized political institutions against their own citizens and against our shared heritage. Far from strengthening democratic principles, Europe has devolved into a hotbed of digital censorship, mass migration, restrictions on religious freedom, and numerous other assaults on democratic self-governance. Chad Wolf, I remember that name, former acting Homeland Security Director during Trump's first term, reiterated this analysis in a speech last week at CPAC Hungary. European elites, he said, are increasingly America-brained, a term that describes a fixation on the leftist and global currents in American civics. So this fixation is what led to a decision by European leaders to allow in floods of migrants with little to no cultural or civic compatibility to their host societies. Yeah, they're just leeches there too. So you should add that as well. As they are doing this as a result of ideas concocted by the American left, such as the nation doesn't really exist, is infinitely expansible, it does not require generations of prior effort and inculcation, and moreover has no moral right to define itself. As the natural consequence of this isn't just mass immigration of unassimilated populations and all the attendant societal problems that brings, but also active persecution of the native population that dares to raise an objection to those policies, or any policy that runs counter to the reigning leftist ideology animating European elites. And by persecution, I don't mean cultural disapproval, but the hard power of the state against its own citizens. Most Americans probably don't realize that Britain arrests thousands of people every year for social media posts that government deems offensive. Yes, they do. And when Keir Starmer, who is the prime minister, came here, he explicitly said, like, no, we're not doing that. And it was like, dude, bro, really? Like, as it says here, like, there are literal thousands of examples of this. Okay, just go look up, for one example, just go look up Tommy Robinson. It says, in 2023, British police arrested more than 12,000 people, a whopping 58% increase from 2019, according to government data. Yeah, because they made someone's feelings hurt, they get arrested. By now, everyone in Britain knows that if you go online and criticize immigration or express disapproval of pro-Hamas demonstrations in Britain, you can expect a visit from the police. Amid anti-immigration protests and rioting last year in the wake of a mass stabbing that left 3 girls dead and others wounded, the British government warned citizens to think before you post. The warning wasn't against posts calling for violence, but against anything the government deemed offensive or inciting hatred. Because that government has been captured. And just go look up and see what's happening there to find out what it is that's captured them. It's not going to be pleasant. Because government crackdowns on free speech aren't limited to immigration, of course, nor are they even limited to speech as such. Last year, for example, a British Army veteran was convicted for praying silently outside an abortion clinic in order to pay a nearly $12,000 fine. In its ruling, the court found the man's presence outside an abortion clinic amounted to disapproval of abortion because, at one point, his head was seen slightly bowed and his hands were clasped, according to ADF International. This ran afoul of a new law criminalizing anything that might be construed as disapproval of abortion within a certain distance from abortion clinics. Like, can you imagine that? Like, the dude's just praying. He's not confronting anybody. He's just there. These people went, oh, he looks like he's praying, so here's a $12,000 fine and we're arresting you for it. I mean, obviously he was, but it's still like, this doesn't sound to anybody like this is a little ridiculous. Like, okay. It wasn't an isolated case. In December 2022, a woman was arrested for doing the same in Birmingham. The charges were eventually dropped, but she was arrested again in March 2023. Those charges were also eventually dropped, but at a certain point it's clear that the process in these cases is part of the punishment. Yeah, the process is the punishment. That's the saying. And it's not just social media posts or silent prayer that can get British citizens in trouble with the law. A man who burned a Quran outside the Turkish consulate in London to protest what he called the Islamist government of Turkish President Erdogan, and I'm not going to say the rest of his name because I will butcher that, I just know his last name is pronounced Erdogan, is now facing criminal prosecution. His conviction would mean the effective reintroduction of blasphemy laws to Britain, which were abolished in England and Wales in 2008 and in Scotland in 2021. I think they did reintroduce them, in fact, just very recently from the time you're hearing this. Like, I'm talking like in the last couple weeks. It would also establish Islam as a special protected religious class and the Quran as a especially protected religious object, meaning that Britain would have a blasphemy law for Islam, but not other religions, and that is completely unfair. Regardless of what you think about Islam, everyone should be able to do the same thing. If you can burn a Quran, you can burn a Bible, you can burn a Torah. Okay, same thing as that. I don't like that. It's something that pisses me off regardless of which holy book it is, but if you can do it to one, you should be able to do it to the rest. If you can't do it to one, you shouldn't be able to do it to any of them. The law should apply equally. There shouldn't be a special group of people. It says what this would amount to is a form of dhimmitud, an Islamic legal system governing non-Muslim people conquered by jihad wars and living in territory subject to Sharia or Islamic law. Convicting a man for burning the Quran in London would mean Britain itself has capitulated to the demands of its unassimilated Muslim minority and has established a de facto system of dhimmitud against its own native British population. So how do you like that, Brits? Says this heavy-handedness from European governments is what Vance was talking about in his Munich Security Conference speech when he said that such policies look more and more like old, entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion, or, God forbid, vote a different way, or even worse, win an election. Says if Nowacki's victory in Poland is any indication, populists in Europe are eventually going to start winning elections. When that happens, we should be prepared for European elites to react in the worst possible way, cracking down on duly elected political leaders while invoking democracy to justify their tyranny. The Trump administration, for its part, should be prepared to respond to this impending conflict and come down on the side of the European people against their corrupt elites. That is correct. We should be on the side of the people there, no matter the nation, and not against the people in charge, because they are running that entire continent into the ground. So what do you think about this? Do you agree with everything here? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.